The air in the Sterling Elite Boxing Academy was different. It was thin, metallic, and expensive, smelling of high-grade leather, antiseptic cleaner, and the kind of sweat that came from well-fed bodies chasing glory, not survival. It was an altar to perfection, a place where the gods and goddesses of the ring were forged in a crucible of privilege and ambition. And into this temple on a sweltering Tuesday afternoon walked a ghost. Her name was Kesha Campbell. She was 18 years old and she carried the weight of the Bronx on her shoulders and the dust of Kingston, Jamaica in her soul. Her sneakers were holy in the truest sense, worn through with the prayers of 1,000 steps walked to and from the 2 cleaning jobs she worked 16 hours a day. Her sports bag was a relic from a past life, its seams frayed and its color faded, a stark, unwelcome contrast to the gleaming, brand-sponsored equipment that lined the walls. "Look what the cat dragged in," a voice sliced through the rhythmic thudding of fists on heavy bags. The sound, sharp and contemptuous, belonged to Victoria the Viper Sterling, the reigning 2-time women's world boxing champion. At 26, she was the undisputed queen of this kingdom, a chiseled monument to genetic gifts and ruthless dedication. She stood, sweat glistening on her perfectly sculpted abs, a sneer playing on her lips that was as practiced as her lethal left hook. The gym fell silent. Every eye, from the seasoned trainers to the aspiring pros, turned to Keisha, who stood frozen by the entrance, a dark-skinned apparition in a world of immaculate white. "Looks like someone got lost on their way to the charity gym downtown," Victoria continued, her voice dripping with venomous amusement. "This is Sterling Elite, sweetie. The monthly fee here is more than you make in a year." Kesha flinched but didn't break. She clutched the cracked screen of her cell phone, her lifeline. "I'm sorry," she muttered, her Jamaican accent a soft, melodic counterpoint to Victoria's harsh American rasp. "I thought this was the place for the Youth Champions Scholarship Program." Victoria threw her head back and laughed, a sound like a siren clearing a path. "Scholarship program? Honey, this isn't a social project. We build champions here, not salvage cases. This is a temple of pugilism, not a soup kitchen." The insult hung in the air, thick and suffocating. 6 months. Kesha had been in America for 6 months, a lifetime away from the sun-baked, chaotic streets of Kingston. She was the vessel for her family's dreams. Every penny they had saved, every prayer they had whispered, poured into her one-way ticket to a new life. The scholarship, a new initiative by the gym's owner to foster raw talent from underprivileged communities, was her only chance. Her only glimmer of hope to train in a place with a real ring, to escape the shared room in the Bronx, to be more than just a cleaner of other people's messes. "The program exists," a firm, gravelly voice interjected. Tom Rodriguez, the gym's owner and a veteran trainer with eyes that had seen it all, emerged from his office. He was a man from a bygone era of boxing, a time when grit mattered more than glamour. In his hand, he held a folder. "And Kesha Campbell is at the top of the approved list." Victoria rolled her eyes with theatrical flair. "Really, Tom? You're turning my training ground into an NGO? My sponsors are not going to like the optics of this." She was a master of the modern game, a warrior whose fiercest battles were often fought on Instagram and Twitter. Her career was built as much on her brutal knockouts as on her controversial social media presence, where she cultivated an image of unapologetic superiority. Her latest post, a photo of her flexing with the caption, "When you're naturally superior, you don't have to pretend to be equal," had already garnered 500,000 likes. "Your sponsors pay me to produce a champion, Victoria, not to curate your social circle," Tom replied dryly, his tone leaving no room for argument. But Victoria was not one to be silenced. She slithered towards Keisha, her smile a predatory baring of teeth. "You know what? Since you want to train with the elite so badly, how about a little orientation, a welcome to the big leagues?" The gym held its collective breath. Everyone knew what was coming. "Let's call it a warm-up fight," Victoria purred, savoring every syllable. "You and me. 3 rounds. A light spar to see if you can even handle the pressure. If you can last, if you can stay on your feet, you can stay. If not..." She made a dismissive gesture with her hand, a flick of the wrist that consigned Kesha to the scrap heap of irrelevance. It was a trap, a public execution designed to shatter Keisha's spirit, to create a piece of viral content that would feed Victoria's ravenous online following, a cruel spectacle to reinforce the established hierarchy. Kesha felt the weight of dozens of eyes on her, dissecting her, judging her, dismissing her. Tom stepped forward. Victoria, that's enough. She's not a pro. Oh, but she wants to be, don't you, scholarship girl? Victoria's eyes bored into Kesha's. This is your chance to prove it, or are you going to run back to whatever slum you crawled out of? The word slum ignited a flame in Keisha's chest, a fire that had been banked for years, smoldering beneath a layer of quiet humility. It was the fire of Kingston, of fighting for scraps, of protecting her younger siblings, of earning respect in a world that offered none. And in her eyes, a flicker of that fire, a heat that Victoria couldn't quite identify, burned with an intensity that was anything but shaken. I accept, Kesha said, her voice calm and clear. Victoria's smug expression faltered for a fraction of a second. She had expected tears begging. A retreat. Are you sure, little girl? Because when I'm done with you, you'll question whether it was ever worth dreaming so big. I'm sure, Kesha repeated. And for the first time since she had walked through those doors, a small, knowing smile touched her lips. What Victoria Sterling, the Viper of the Ring, the Queen of social media, couldn't possibly know was that she was about to discover the answer to a question she never thought to ask. In the forgotten, sun-scorched back alleys and makeshift rings of Kingston, Jamaica, Kesha Campbell was known by another name, a name whispered with a mixture of fear and awe. They called her Lightning. And like all lightning, she only revealed her true, devastating power when the storm arrived. The news of the sparring session spread through the gym and then, via a flurry of texts and social media posts, to the wider New York boxing community. Victoria, ever the showwoman, fueled the fire. She went live on Instagram, her phone held aloft like a scepter. Guys, you are not going to believe this, she narrated to her 2 million followers, her voice a cocktail of mock disbelief and genuine cruelty. I'm here at the gym, getting ready for my next title defense, and some random girl from Jamaica, a complete amateur on a charity scholarship, thinks she can hang. So I've decided to give her a lesson. A welcome to America. We're calling it a warm-up fight. It'll be a quick one, folks. Don't blink. The comments poured in, a torrent of digital vitriol. Destroy her, Queen Vic. Teach these people their place. Show her what a real American champion looks like. The fight was no longer a private humiliation. It was a public spectacle, a digital lynching in the making. Sports journalists, always sniffing for a controversial story, began to arrive. In the locker room, a space that smelled of old leather and liniment, Kesha methodically wrapped her hands. Her fingers weren't shaking. They never did before a fight. But her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of controlled anger and painful memories. Tom Rodriguez entered, his face etched with concern. Kesha, you don't have to do this. Her arrogance isn't worth a broken bone. We can sort out the scholarship without this circus. I won't get hurt, Kesha replied, her voice soft but certain as she tested the fit of the borrowed 16-ounce gloves. She's been the world champion for 2 years, Tom pressed. She has knockout power in both hands. She's a professional predator. And I have something she'll never have? Kesha interrupted, turning to look the veteran trainer dead in the eye. Tom frowned. What's that? Hunger. The word hung in the air, simple and profound. In his 30 years of training fighters, Tom had heard it all. He had seen bravado, confidence, and fear, but rarely had he heard that single word spoken with such raw, unshakable conviction. He saw it in her eyes then, the look he had only ever seen in the true greats, the born predators of the ring. It was the look of someone who had fought not for belts or glory, but for their next meal, for their very existence. Why did you accept, Keisha? Tom asked, sitting down beside her. Why not just walk away? Kesha closed her eyes for a long moment, and the sterile Manhattan locker room dissolved, replaced by the vibrant, chaotic symphony of Kingston. The scent of jerk chicken and diesel fumes, the sound of her mother's screams begging her to stop fighting in the street, the visceral, bone-jarring feeling of her knuckles connecting with surgical precision. The nickname, Lightning, whispered with fear and respect in the shadowed alleyways. Because I've lived this story before, she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. People like Victoria, they think they can break you with words, with contempt. They look at you and see something inferior, something to be dismissed. But they forget one important thing. What's that? Tom asked, leaning closer. Those who grow up fighting for survival don't fight for sport. They fight to exist. A chill ran down Tom's spine. This wasn't a boast. It was a prophecy. At that moment, the gym door swung open, and a man walked in who made Keisha freeze. He was about 50, with the gnarled, scarred hands of a man who had known hard labor and the weary, wise eyes of someone who had seen too much of the world's ugliness. Uncle Winston, Kesha breathed, her composure cracking for the first time. Lightning, the man said, his voice a low rumble, his Jamaican accent thick and unmistakable. The nickname echoed in the suddenly quiet gym. A few of the older boxers frowned, the name stirring a distant, half-forgotten memory from the murky world of underground fighting circuits. What are you doing here? Kesha asked, her voice tight with panic. I took the first flight from Miami when your cousin called, Winston said, his eyes scanning the scene, taking in the preening champion and the gathering crowd. I thought we agreed. Those days were over. He turned to Tom. You the trainer? Tom Rodriguez, he said, extending a hand. You know this girl? Winston gave a short, mirthless laugh. Know her? I've known her since she was a girl of 8, fighting boys twice her size for a piece of bread. I can assure you, Mr. Rodriguez, that woman over there. He nodded towards Victoria, who was busy posing for selfies, has no idea what she has just walked into. He lowered his voice for Tom and Keisha alone. I saw her latest post. Warm-up fight? Arrogant. Just the type Lightning used to educate on the streets of Kingston. Uncle, please, Kesha begged. Don't. I don't want anyone to know. Know what? Tom pressed, his curiosity now a roaring fire. Winston sighed, a sound heavy with the weight of years. Tom, you seem like a decent man. So I'm going to tell you something that might change your perspective on this warm-up. That girl, he pointed to his niece, was considered the most dangerous street fighter Kingston ever produced. At 12, she was defeating grown men. At 15, gangsters and toughs paid her respect and gave her a wide berth. Lightning Campbell wasn't just a nickname, it was a warning. He paused, his gaze softening as he looked at Keisha. She stopped when she got her visa, swore she'd never set foot in a ring again. She wanted a new life. Tom looked at Keisha, truly seeing her for the first time. He saw past the worn-out sneakers and the nervous posture. He saw the coiled power, the lifetime of training forged not in a pristine gym, but in the unforgiving crucible of the streets. Then why this? He asked. Why agree to fight a world champion? Because, Winston said, his eyes narrowing as he watched Victoria laugh with her entourage. Some people confuse kindness with weakness. They confuse poverty with inability. And Lightning? Lightning never ever tolerated being underestimated because of her color, her gender, or where she came from. Across the gym, Victoria finished a call with her manager. Michael, relax, she laughed into her phone. A warm-up is exactly what it is. It'll be so quick she won't even have time to get hurt. We're talking total domination. This is going to be viral gold. Winston overheard. He leaned into Tom. Some advice, my friend. If you were a betting man, you'd put your house on Lightning. Because Victoria Sterling, for all her titles, has never been hungry a day in her life. She has never fought for survival. She's never faced someone who learned that losing means not eating. Lightning isn't here to look pretty. She's here to prove a point. Kesha approached them, her face set like stone. Tom looked at her, his mind reeling. Why, Kesha? Really, why? Kesha's gaze locked onto Victoria, who was preening for the cameras, completely oblivious. When she finally spoke, her voice was cold iron. Because she looked at me and saw an easy victim, a joke for her social media, a nobody. She wanted to humiliate me because of the color of my skin and the accent in my voice. What she doesn't know is that where I grew up, respect isn't given. It's earned, it's taken. And when someone tries to steal your dignity... She smiled, a predatory flash of white in the dim light. Well, sometimes lightning has to remind people why storms are to be feared. The bell for the first round screamed. The two fighters met in the center of the ring. Victoria, oozing contemptuous confidence, came out like a whirlwind, throwing a flurry of quick, stinging jabs. It was the same combination that had overwhelmed countless opponents. But Kesha wasn't there. She moved with an unnatural fluidity, a wisp of smoke, her feet gliding across the canvas as if she could sense Victoria's intentions before the champion's own muscles had fired. "What the hell?" Victoria muttered, her punches hitting nothing but empty air. "Stay still, girl!" She roared in frustration, lunging forward with a powerful right cross, putting all her weight behind it. It was the opening, the mistake of a fighter who had never been forced to respect her opponent. As Victoria's punch sailed past her ear, throwing the champion momentarily off balance, Keisha exploded. It wasn't a wild swing. It was a perfectly timed, surgically precise counterleft. The sound of the glove connecting with the side of Victoria's jaw was a sharp, sickening crack that echoed through the stunned silence of the gym. Victoria staggered backward, her eyes wide with shock. A thin trickle of blood appeared at the corner of her lip. She touched her face, her mind unable to process what had just happened. She, the Viper, the untouchable champion, had been hit cleanly, rocked by a single punch from the amateur. "Impossible," she whispered. But Kesha was already moving again, a phantom dancing on the edge of her vision. What followed was not a fight. It was a masterclass, a symphony of controlled violence. Kesha wasn't just fighting, she was deconstructing the champion, piece by piece. Every punch from Victoria was dodged with an almost insulting ease. Every advance was met with a bewildering array of angles and footwork. For every one blow Victoria managed to land, a glancing, frustrated shot, she received three in return. Sharp, stinging counters that snapped her head back and left her increasingly confused and desperate. The crowd, which had started out jeering for Keisha's blood, had fallen into a state of stunned awe. The cruel entertainment they had come to see had transformed into something else entirely. "Who is this girl?" someone shouted from the back. Winston, watching from the corner, allowed himself a proud, grim smile. "Lightning Campbell," he murmured to himself. The moment of truth arrived in the second round. Victoria's face was marked and swollen, her confidence shattered, replaced by a growing, frantic panic. She could hear her manager, Jerry, screaming instructions, but the words were a meaningless buzz. The roar of the crowd had shifted, the tide of their allegiance turning against her. Her social media, she knew, would be a raging inferno. The comments on her livestream had already flipped from adulation to ridicule. "Where's the champ?" "That Jamaican is destroying her." "Victoria is getting schooled by an amateur." That's when Keisha closed the distance. She stalked the retreating champion, backing her into the ropes. There was no anger in her eyes, only a cold, clinical focus. "Lightning was never just a nickname," Keisha said, her voice calm and clear over Victoria's ragged breathing. "It was a warning." The combination that followed was a blur of motion, too fast for most of the cell phone cameras to capture cleanly. Jab, cross, hook, uppercut. 4 punches, delivered in less than 2 seconds. Each one landed with surgical precision. Victoria's eyes rolled back in her head. Her body went limp, collapsing to the canvas like a demolished building. The gym erupted, a deafening roar of disbelief and exhilaration. Tom Rodriguez, officiating the bout, stood over the fallen champion. Her legs twitched, but she was gone. 8, 9, 10, it's over. Knockout. The undefeated world champion, knocked out cold by the girl she had called a social project, a warm-up. Keisha walked calmly to the corner where Victoria's team was now frantically trying to revive her. She knelt down. "You said you wanted to teach me a lesson," she said softly, so only the dazed champion could hear. "I hope you learned that respect is not determined by your nationality, your bank account, or the color of your skin. It is earned by character." Victoria looked up at Kesha, her eyes swimming with tears of pure, undiluted humiliation. And for the first time, a flicker of something that might have been respect. The fallout was immediate and brutal. The video of the knockout, juxtaposed with Victoria's earlier arrogant posts, became the most shared meme of the year. Jamaican Lightning trended worldwide. Victoria's social media accounts hemorrhaged followers, a loss of over 1 million in the first 24 hours. Her sponsors, Nike, Gatorade, the brands that had built her empire, began to drop her one by one, issuing statements condemning her unsportsmanlike and prejudiced behavior. 3 months later, the two women's lives were unrecognizable. Victoria Sterling, her career in ruins and her fortune dwindling, was forced to sell her Miami mansion. In a desperate interview on a third-rate podcast, she finally uttered the words she should have said from the beginning. "I was wrong. My prejudice blinded me." Kesha Campbell is an exceptional fighter and a person I should have respected. Meanwhile, Kesha Lightning Campbell, the ghost from the Bronx, was signing a multi-million-dollar professional contract with Golden Gloves Promotions. Brands that valued authenticity and resilience, like Under Armour, lined up to sponsor her, launching a campaign with the tagline, "Earned, Not Given." She established the Lightning Dreams Foundation, funding scholarships for underprivileged athletes. Its first gym was built in her old neighborhood in Kingston. At the opening ceremony, broadcast live around the world, Kesha stood at a podium. "This story is not about revenge," she said, her voice clear and strong. "It is about dignity. It's about proving that respect is not a privilege." Victoria Sterling gave me a gift. She underestimated me. And when someone underestimates you, you have a choice. You can let it destroy you, or you can use it as fuel to become unbeatable. Months later, when she knocked out her opponent in the second round to become the new unified world champion, the first person she thanked was not her trainer or her family. "I want to thank everyone who ever tried to put me down," she said, looking directly into the camera. "You taught me that true power comes from an absolute refusal to let others define your limits." In a small rented apartment, Victoria Sterling watched the broadcast alone. As the referee raised Kesha's hand, she finally understood. Talent can be a gift, but greatness is forged in the furnace of adversity. Kesha Campbell hadn't just won a fight. She had become everything Victoria had said she could never be, and that was a knockout from which there would be no recovery. The storm had passed, leaving the world irrevocably changed.